everyone. My name is Babette Goldstein, and I'm here to present on trauma-informed mediation. I'm presenting as an MSW student from CSU, and I have taught personal transformation, yoga, meditation, and therapeutic seminars at yoga conferences and healing gatherings around the world. I am second author in a published research on mantra meditation's impact on increasing vagal tone, which is referenced on the slides. And I'm currently working on a project to create a culture that prevents and helps people to heal from institutional betrayal in spiritual communities. I was trained in nonviolent communication by Marshall Rosenberg, and I'm passionate about building conscious communication and community. And I like to support spaces that facilitate inner reflection and dynamic personal and community growth. First, I want to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs here because I feel like it creates a really beautiful frame for why trauma-informed mediation is so important. And if I could put it in just one sentence, it would be something like, mediation requires us to be resourced, present, and to be able to be in contact with other people calmly, where we can see our views and others' views, which only happens at the upper end of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I'm going to go over this to explain it more in detail now. So if we look at the physiological needs on Maslow's hierarchy of needs chart that I created as applied to mediation, you can see that first in the hierarchy of what needs to be met in order to rise up into the high level of relating that is mediation, there's a need for food, water, knowing where the bathroom is, orienting to the room, and the opening statement. Now, I'm sure that there are cultures and people around the world who can come to calm and mature mediation and resolving conflicts in a win-win way without their physiological needs being met. I believe that's possible, but in general, these are general themes. And what we're looking right now at is vagal tone. We want to see that the dorsal vagal system is not activated, so the person is not releasing endorphins to release pain, where they're experiencing pain relievers, where they're not experiencing a sense of disassociation from their own personal needs, or they're not in fight where they want to win and destroy the other person, or don't really care about the other person's needs when the win-lose, or where they want to just run out of the room and they're just too jittery to focus. So these are things that help, right? We set the foundation by meeting the physiological needs. Food, water, orienting to the room, knowing where the bathroom is, and having a clear opening statement. Now, this might sound like a lot of review for you because you're experienced mediators and I am a student of mediation at CSU, but I will continue. Next up on the chart is the safety needs, which includes confidentiality, freedom of choice, and space between people. So freedom of choice means that if you're in danger, you can leave, you can run, you can pause, you can stop. Space between people means there's enough space that if the other person becomes violent in anger, that they feel safe, that there's a distance that will protect them, perhaps a table in between. Now, there's different people with different levels of trauma in their lives and different levels of caution, and these things also may not be necessary for everyone. But as a general theme, just so we understand the nervous system and what can create or trigger trauma that's already there in the system, let's look at these as protective. Confidentiality also, so that we know that if you go into a caucus with a person and they speak to you about items that could be used against them by the other person to get a better settlement or come to an agreement that's more in the other person's favor, that they know that you're not going to reveal that, and that they know that you're not going to reveal it in court unless there is some urgent and necessary legal reason for that. So those are my interpretation of safety needs in mediation. When those are settled, then people can come into the belonging needs of Maslow, which I'll call the culture of love and trust. Now, maybe sometimes people who are in the mediation are undergoing a divorce and they once loved and trusted each other, or maybe it's a property dispute where the people don't have any bonding already, but still trying to meet these belonging needs in some way. So by holding neutrality as a mediator, and we do that. We show them that there is room for all of them to manifest and be heard and seen within the context as it's relevant for the mediation process, and we accept them. I know that ground rules I've been reading have been a little bit controversial. I grew up in a Quaker community, and the Mediator Handbook came out of the community that I grew up being a part of, the Quaker Religious Society of Friends in Philadelphia. And in that book, it talks about ground rules being questionable. But I am going to say that ground rules, especially, in the beginning, agreeing to listen and not interrupt each other and to strive for mutual benefit, is the foundation of how and why mediation is done. And so those ground rules I personally find to be essential, at least at this phase of my development here. Also, I'm including things like art and plants and beauty in the room. Now, someone else may not care about art or plants or beauty in the room, and their favorite baseball team on the wall, a picture of them might help them feel belonging and soothed. I'm sure it's unique and different to different people's cultures and places, but for me, I'm going to add these because I want people to resource what brings them a sense of safety and that hopefully isn't irritating to anyone. So that when they are stressed out, they can turn to that beauty and reorient themselves and ground themselves and come back into connection and capacity to connect with others. Moving into the esteem needs up the chart. So the level of physiological and safety and belonging needs are met enough where a person is moving into the need for esteem. So here, it's also the achievement needs. So in this context, I am proposing that achievement means achieving a win-win culture as opposed to a win-lose culture. That's, in my opinion, a higher level of resolution when possible. So things like this include, as a foundation, unconditional positive regard by the mediator and neutrality. But also it's that mood of striving by both people where they can trust that both of them are really working towards that as a goal in and of itself, if possible, if it's at all possible. I'm thinking of like a divorce mediation where they're striving to be fair to the other person and fair to themselves. To me, that would be meeting the achievement esteem needs within the context of mediation. Then finally, we come to self-actualization as I'm applying it to mediation. So here, my sense is that one can hold multiple perspectives, hold a mindset of mutual gain, and one can be self-advocating. It's kind of a synopsis of everything that came before it. But I want to remind you, and this is the foundation for the rest of this presentation, that when our amygdala is triggered, when we're flooded, when our heart is racing, when the endorphins get released and we feel no pain, it's really hard to come to a win-win solution. It's hard to make contact with the other person. It's hard to hear. It's hard to relate. So I hope that this is a good argument to make the rest of this presentation useful to you. Thank you. Move on to slide number 4. Trauma is pervasive, as explained by Fallett in an article in the references section in 2009. What does trauma is pervasive mean? Well, according to Bessel van der Kolk, a preeminent thinker and the discoverer of polyvagal theory, trauma is an inescapable stressful event that overwhelms people's existing coping mechanisms. And according to Peter Levine, the writer of the book Waking the Tiger and the founder of Somatic Experiencing, trauma is in the nervous system, not in the event. So one person may experience a situation, be able to sequence it through, and not be impacted by trauma, and another person is. And so we just need to be alert. So what does it mean that trauma is pervasive in this context? What it means is that trauma impacts the mediator. Mediation situations can be traumatic. They can trigger our previous trauma. It can be scary if there's a big fight going on and people lose the plot. It can also happen as a result of mediation. So what that means is that a mediator, if they're not sensitive to trauma in a person, can actually trigger it in a person who's being mediated. Even if it's unintentional, even if they do nothing wrong, that can still happen. So that's another argument for why trauma-informed mediation is useful and important to be educated about. So when trauma happens, it's hard to think clearly, it's difficult to self-advocate, it can create sensitivity and stress triggers, it impacts all aspects of our lives. Trauma is deep and life-shaping, especially if it's developmental trauma. It's also insidious and plays on the vulnerable. So if you have someone who comes from a vulnerable population, there's a much higher likelihood that they've had a lot of trauma in their lives. And a final really important point about this from my spider chart here is that it affects the way that people approach helpful relationships. So if someone has been traumatized by someone in a position that you're holding or something similar, they may have a hard time trusting you. And so that's an important thing to look at and kind of work around also. Trauma is an exhausting way to deal with stress. One can feel hopeless and despair, a deadness, or simply exhausted from the anxiety or from the rage that can arise. Let's move on to the next slide. Polyvagal theory of Stephen Porges applied to mediation. Slide number 5. So a normal response to stress, which comes through the autonomic nervous system, would be through the sympathetic or the parasympathetic system on the chart. So in the sympathetic system, one is hyper-aroused, which is when one is in fight and flight. We're going to go more into the details of how that expresses later. I want to go right now into the dorsal vagal expression, which is the parasympathetic, or the hypoarousal, which is the freeze response. Now this works with the unmyelinated portion of the vagal nerve, and so it's less sophisticated, it's much more primitive, and it just slows everything down, where you dissociate and become numb to yourself even. So the reason that that's important in nature is that if say an antelope is caught by a lion, that freeze response may make the lion leave the antelope alone. Or if he carries the lion carries the antelope to her cubs and maybe play with her, maybe in a moment of neglect where they're not paying attention, thinking the antelope is dead, potentially the antelope could come back to life and run away. In our life now, it really comes up when, for some reason, our nervous system has a sense that this is life or death. Though for many of us, it has become our common response, just to kind of shut down and wait until the stressor goes away, where we feel safe again and we come back to life. I want to say something about this, that in nature, the trauma response is not very common, and it happens, like in polar bears who are at zoos, but it's not as common because animals have the capacity to fully sequence through the response to the stress. So the antelope, if he wakes up, If he's lucky enough, he can shake it off and run away. But in real life situations here, we generally don't even know how to do that anymore. And so in a therapeutic environment, people get retaught, like in an experiential training or therapeutic environment like somatic experiencing that Peter Levine founded. People are supported in doing that. That's not what we're going to be doing in a mediation context, but it's good to know about it, and it's good to know when to refer people to that kind of support to learn those skills, because many of us didn't learn them otherwise. We're very lucky that it's been discovered. So waking the tiger is about that inside, we have a tiger inside of us. Maybe parts of us are frozen. And when we wake it, we may have to sequence through from dorsal vagal into the sympathetic hyperarousal response of fight or flight, even though it's no longer even relevant to this situation that we're in, but our nervous system has to sequence through it in some kind of safe way and shake it off. And then we can really be grounded and be ready to engage on the far right quadrant of this chart that I made, which is about ventral vagal, the myelinated, which means super fast, sophisticated system, a part of the nervous system of the vagus nerve. And in this safety, there's a capacity for a sophisticated response. So when we feel safe and the trauma is not ruling us very much, the heartbeat is calm, we can look at each other in the eyes, keeping our feet on the ground, feeling our seat. We can engage in social engagement while staying calm and centered. Curiosity and with a sense of calm and connection with others. So again, that's the place where mediation works, and that's why I'm going into depth to explain what trauma can do and how, even in people who are otherwise very capable of being involved in mediation, if they're triggered, they won't be able to. Thank you. Okay, so now we're moving to slide 6. Heart rhythms directly affect physical and mental performance. We worked with the heart math equipment while doing our research on vagal tone, and so I wanted to include one of their slides. And it just translates it through a different lens, as through the coherence, the heart-brain coherence, that is reflective of vagal tone. That when there's incoherence, when you're disturbed and under stress, it inhibits brain function. And that coherence, when you're calm and collected, not just with the endorphins flowing in like a kind of subtle dorsal vagal suppression state, but like genuinely awake and alert and connected. It facilitates brain function, and that's one of the reasons why people meditate and do yoga and get into these kind of other modalities to help us to learn how to overcome the stress response quickly. Okay, so now we're on to slide 7, which is where I created a mediation focused version of looking at fight, flight, freeze response. So you can see some hints of what might be going on. Is the person hostile and argumentative? Is their heart racing? That might be fight or flight. Is there rapid speech? Do they have difficulty listening and hearing? Are they joking just a little bit too much? Are they fuzzy-headed? Is their face red? Are they fidgety and want to leave? Are they holding their breath? Are they breathing rapidly? So they're just some things I thought of off the top of my head that might present themselves in this situation of mediation. The next 2 slides are for you to look at your leisure. There's going to be another file here where you can just flip through the slides on your own, and you can just examine it and find out more information about physiologically what's happening when a person is in fight flight, their heart rate, their blood pressure, their adrenaline, their defensive responses, or when they're in freeze, the fuel storage and insulin activity, for example, the raised pain threshold, the conservation of metabolic resources, and then what happens in social engagement, which is considered to be rest and digest. So if a person is having a hard time with their digestive system, it's possible that they are stuck in fight, flight, freeze too much of the time in their lives. And so there's not enough time to focus on the digestion. That's just a little side. Okay, moving to the next slide. This is another slide that comes from an outside source and is also a reference that you can look at in your own time when you have the slide file separate from me talking. And just shows visually what it looks like when a person is in safety, when they're in danger, and when they're in life threat, with the hypoarousal or the dorsal vagal response showing a life threat, which is that freeze response. And obviously, that rarely happens. We rarely have a tiger attacking us, though it does happen, but very rarely. But still, we respond in these same ways to ordinary daily stresses in our lives. And those of us who've had much higher stress and trauma in our life often have a much harder time recovering from it and need to learn and get more support so that their system can sequence it through more easily. Okay, so there are many different types of trauma. There's shock trauma, developmental trauma, vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, intergenerational trauma, and there's trauma in the field. And I don't expect you to become an expert in trauma after this short little presentation, but I do want you to know about it. So shock trauma means that it's like a car accident. Developmental trauma is things that happen throughout your life as a child that are unescapable. That can be the one that needs the most support later on in life so that people can learn how to be less sensitive to the trauma response when it's not necessarily helpful. But just a reminder that the trauma response saves lives all the time when our body releases it appropriately. There's vicarious trauma, so watching sad and scary movies, being involved in a particularly difficult mediation that isn't really a mediation anymore could be a vicarious trauma. There's secondary trauma, intergenerational, so people who went through the Holocaust or another form of genocide gets passed down, trauma and distrust of other peoples and a sense of just general unsafety. And there's trauma in the community field, perhaps especially in environments and neighborhoods where there has been a lot of trauma. People can easily pick that up, and there's just, again, a general sense of unsafety and a need to be on alert. Moving on to slide 10, we can see, I just brought out elements of trauma-informed mediation. Just as an overview, we're kind of moving into the closure. And after this, we'll do a little guided meditation where you learn some techniques that you can practice yourself or share with others, just as a little taster or appetizer of trauma-informed techniques. But for now, let's look at this. On the left-hand side, you see the mediator. And the choices the mediator has is to vet the participants to make sure that they're ready for the session. And if they are ready, but then they have a response, then you can begin to know how to respond by looking at these tools and techniques. You can make sure to create safety, create choice, have your own self-awareness of when you are triggered. And sometimes even just revealing in a therapeutic way what you're experiencing, if done right, can help the other person to settle down and to develop trust. There are the various self-regulation techniques. Some of them are feeling your seat, feeling your feet. We're going to go over these later. Breathing, noticing beauty, and a timeout. Am I safe? Another really good one is to ask oneself, if you're in mediation, what solutions do I have available to me now here that I didn't have available before? And as far as the participants, making sure they support their own safety, that they can pause if needed, and they have tools for self-regulation. Okay, moving to slide 11. First, I want you to just take a listen. This is about ways to resource and recover when triggered in mediation. I'm just going to pause for about 30 seconds. I am safe here. I feel. Maybe just close your eyes for a second and listen and breathe. Safe here. If you like. I feel peace near. I am safe. Okay, so this slide is about ways to resource and recover when triggered in mediation. We are going to have a practice session after this, but for now, we're going to just go over the basic ideas of things you can do. There's breath practice, reorienting, am I safe here? Knowing that each of us in the session has a choice and can stay or not, and can pause or not. There's an option to write what's frustrating, to feel one's seat on the chair. It's amazing how that can be grounding. To remember that we have a body again if we move into the freeze response. To feel our feet, wiggle our toes, shake it out. If a person is particularly vulnerable but they want to do the mediation session, they could have a therapist there to support them in sequencing and working through things and staying present in the mediation, as long as there's an agreement that lots of pauses might happen and be necessary to move through the process of mediation with that person. I imagine it could be a very enriching and amazing experience for people. That's what I'm thinking anyway. Allowing for growth, asking for what can happen that couldn't happen before. I mentioned that earlier. And talk in eye contact with a safe person, which includes a possible therapist, or it could be the mediator. It could be a caucus. Okay, and moving to the next slide. So we're talking about ventral vagal. When a person feels safe, when calm and clear, we are in ventral vagal, which is the ideal position for mediation, in my opinion. So the social engagement system is activated, so we interact verbally. The facial nerves are stimulated. We're ready to solve the problem through our words, through our eyes, through our contact, through social exchange. There's the possibility of self-advocacy, the possibility for cultivating belonging and love. It's much easier to see multiple perspectives from here. There's a much greater possibility for win-win, social problem solving, and we have access to this fast, sophisticated processing of the myelinated ventral vagal system. Okay, so now we move to slide 14 after this, where we move into an experiential practice to help recovery in session. So mediation, can move us back to safety and social engagement in ventral vagal. Well, welcome back if you've left and come back. This is the beginning of our experiential practices to help recovery while in session. So mediation can help move back to safety and social engagement in ventral vagal. This is the experiential portion of this presentation, and I invite you to try it out. There will be 3 different practices, and I hope to keep this in a separate file that's also available for people who just want to practice the mediation meditations. Okay, moving on to slide 14. Just because we're calm, clear, and resilient most of the time doesn't mean that we don't get triggered in some difficult situations. Even surfing turtles can get triggered. Sometimes we all just need a little help to get calm and clear before we're ready for mediation. Here are some practices to help. Here we begin. Beginning slide 14. Just because we are calm, clear, and resilient most of the time doesn't mean we don't get triggered in some difficult situations. Even surfing turtles can get triggered. Sometimes we all just need a little help to get calm and clear before we're ready for mediation. Here are some tools. This very first mediation is mediation 1 of 3, which is attending to discomfort, otherwise known as befriending yourselves. Please find yourself in a comfortable seat, somewhere where you can spend a few minutes with this first meditation for mediation, attending to discomfort. And try and see if you can make it a private spot so that you won't be interrupted. Okay, good. So you can use this process when you're feeling discomfort in your own body or if there's an issue that's troubling you. This process can help you learn self-soothing and help you to develop a kinder relationship with yourself. Do it as many times as you would like, and the more you practice it, the easier and more integrated this practice will become. You can also use this process with your clients for the same purpose. This particular meditation comes from Katie Asmus and Sway Spilkin from their course Bridging Soma and Soul that I took in 2017. I'm going to race through it, but feel free to pause as you need. First, find a place in your body that feels good. This is your resource place. For example, your feet, your back against the chair. Then take a vacation into it and see what you notice. We'll come back here towards the end of this process. If you're working on an issue, notice where in your body there is any discomfort related to this issue. First you feel what feels good, then you move to where you feel the discomfort in your body in relationship to an issue. Just scan your body and notice any discomfort, tightness, anxiety, ache, etc. This can be emotional or physical, it doesn't matter, and you don't have to know what this is about. Just feel it. Next, notice what sensations are there in this spot. Is it tight, hot, piercing, sharp, jumpy? Does this spot have a color associated with it, a texture, a shape? Is there an image that seems to go along with this place in your body? Is there any emotion associated with it? There may or may not be, or you may not know what the emotion is exactly or why it's there. That's fine. You don't need to wonder why. Ask why anyway, because it gets us more in our heads. Instead, just stay with the sensation and the image or emotion. If this place had words, what would it say? For example, I am scared, or I didn't like what just happened, or I feel out of control. Whatever's there, simply acknowledge it, welcoming it, and validate it. This step is very important. Often we make the mistake of judging our experience or shaming ourselves for it. Instead, this practice of inner parenting is about welcoming ourselves exactly as we are. Now we move on to part 2, attending to discomfort, bringing in the healthy inner parent of this first meditation for mediation. Next, ask the part of you that feels disturbance what it needs from you and listen for the answer. Let the words arise from the place in your body if they can. For example, it might say, I need to feel loved, or I need to feel safe, and I need to know that I'm okay. Place your attention on your resourced place, the place in your body that felt good to you at the beginning of this practice. While in contact with your resourced place, put your hand on the place on your body that has become uncomfortable and give it what it needs with your words and energy. For example, if the place is your belly and the need is to feel safe, you might place your hand on your belly and say aloud or to yourself in a kind voice, I know you're scared and I'm right here with you. I can't guarantee that nothing bad will ever happen, but I will do my best to keep you safe. I am right here. Now, as the final step, notice what happens. Does the emotion shift? Does something soften? Does it feel good to be attending to yourself in this way? What's the result of the practice? If you notice a lessening of the discomfort or even some good feelings in your body, breathe into those feelings and deepen them. Savor them. Remind yourself that with a little attention and intention, this level of change is possible. All the parts of us just want to be attended to and loved. That ends the first meditation. Begin the second set of practices. Now, these are short-term healing resource exercises that also come from Katie Asmus and Sway Emily Spilkin from the Bridging Soma and Soul 9-month course I took with them in 2017 in Boulder, Colorado. I'm taking it right from their script. And if you have more questions about that, you can check them out at thresholdshealing.com. Here we begin. The first is to have the client ground and feel their feet, their sit bones, their pelvic floor, the chair under them, the couch behind them, the earth. You can pick something for them, or they can pick. If you'd like, you can have the client sit on the floor and sit with them and ask them to describe what they notice in their body as they do. They can also, number 2, wiggle their fingers and toes, because that's body awareness, which pulls you out of disassociation. Number 3, have the client look around the room and allow their eyes to land on something that feels good to them. Next, have them describe 3 details of what it is that they see. This takes attention off the body where the charge is and into the present moment. Number 4, have the client scan for what feels good in their body and take a vacation into it. Just give them a minute. Number 5, invite the client to place a hand or 2 on their own body, perhaps a hand on the heart and a hand on the belly in a containing touch. Have them feel hands from torso and torso from hands, and ask, what are your hands communicating to you right now? 6, if appropriate, use relational regulation through touch. Your foot on their foot, your hand on their back or kidneys. Ask permission before you contact and check it out with them. Ask them to tell you when they're ready for contact and when they're ready for you to remove the contact. Now, I understand that Katie came from the dance therapy department at Naropa, as did I, and Sway is also a somatic psychologist. And so we do have a bias for these kind of things, and it's very likely that all of this isn't relevant to your mediation practice with everyone, for sure. But there may be cases where you can be a support person for a person in mediation in a way, or even for the group in the middle of mediation, where these kind of practices in some cultural contexts, especially here in Colorado, where it's relevant. And some of these are relevant all the time. Number 7, teach the client the practice of savoring, deepening and anchoring and resourcing experience in the body, because pleasure, for most of us, signals safety. Number 8, help the client tolerate what doesn't feel good and not get sucked into the trauma vortex. Help them stay with awareness enough to metabolize the anxiety and discomfort and move it through their bodies. 9, have the client make a list of their inner and outer resources and spend time savoring each one. 10, have your client bring a resource into the room. What's it like to have your loving husband next to you? Great. And how do you notice that relaxation in your body? Number 11, help the client tap into their spiritual resources, the divine, the energetic matrix, field of love, the earth as a holding container, and have them notice what happens in their body as they do. Number 12, reality check. What's different now than what the trauma was, than when the trauma was happening? I'll say it again. What's different now than when the trauma was happening? Let's assume this is a divorce mediation and someone is very frustrated. What, if anything, communicates safety to their nervous system in the present moment? You there with them, the color of the walls, the capacities they have in their life now that they don't have before, etc. Number 13, this is my, and then you tap or squeeze a part of your body. So this is my nose. I remember children do this. This is my ear. This is my elbow. Just tapping and squeezing. Again, it helps people come out of disassociation and into the physical experience of life. Number 14, Invite the client to push against your hands or the wall, and this can help them move from immobility and hypoarousal into activation and sequence some anger, or simply feel contact, which in and of itself is resourcing. Number 15. With enough safety, we come out of freeze and disassociation and back into sensation. When that happens, it doesn't always feel good. This can catapult the client back into anxiety and freeze. When this happens, help them tolerate what doesn't feel good with the safety of the present moment to metabolize the discomfort while not getting sucked back into the trauma vortex. Now, as I read these to you, I imagine that some of these you can use, and some of these are just giving you a window into the world of what's possible if you were to bring in a support person into your mediation who had these tools to help your clients function at this high ventral vagal level consistently throughout the mediation process so that you can get the best results for all parties. And that ends the meditation mediation list and conglomeration of quick practices, quickies for the second practice. Thank you. Okay. And for the final meditation for mediation, I'm going to offer one of my favorites. It does take a few minutes, but it's an incredibly powerful practice that can be used to help people transition pretty quickly from a trauma response to being in the present moment. So while sitting, now again, this is something that you can have a mediation, a therapist that's there for a person as a support person for both sides or for one person. They can do this, or you can do this for everybody in the room if the tensions get too high. Or you can do it for yourself before or after a session that was particularly stressful or that you're particularly concerned about. So while sitting with your client or with yourself, begin to track using your story, physical, kinesthetic, and energetic tracking skills if you know what those are. We're going to be looking at when you or they are in a more constricted state and when you or they feel more expansive. To start, help them naturally deepen into the expanded and resource safety states by inviting them to think of a resource and notice what is happening in their body when they connect with it. Invite them to deepen and savor the resource state as they have in the earlier meditations. Next, support them in taking deep, present-centered, felt sense contact with the sensation in their body when they're feeling more activated or constricted or stressed. Help them to stay with the uncomfortable sensation and move through any fear that comes up. Fear is a natural response to a sensation associated with a past event or memory that was scary. Support them in dropping the story and staying with the sensation, describing what they feel, using sensation-based words, hot, tingly, achy, tight, etc., long enough to watch it begin to change. This helps uncouple the fear from the immobility or constriction around the sensation. As they stay with the sensation long enough, with enough presence, they may find that it begins to shift and sequence out of the endpoints or discharge directly out of the tissue. If the constriction doesn't begin to sequence out on its own, this is a sign that the client's nervous system is not perceiving enough safety to release. Helping the client to gently shift their awareness from the discomfort onto a resource can create the uncoupling they need for their bodies to naturally sequence the energy and release. This is called pendulation. You may want to invite the client to slowly go back and forth a few times between the resource, which is a healing vortex, and the constriction or activation, which is the trauma vortex, and allow and release what wants to occur. Allow and release that wants to occur. Alternatively, you can invite your client to hold both the resource and the discomfort in their mind at once and see what occurs. Sometimes this allows for sequencing as well. Now, I want to give credit that all three of these meditations for mediation come from my textbook from Bridging Soma and Soul from Katie Asmus and Sway Emily Spoken from my 2017 class. I do believe that the course is still being offered. I can't promise that, but I think so. And you can check them out at thresholdshealing.com if you're interested. Yeah, or find people who would like to be a support person for you with this kind of work. So thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next slide. Concludes my presentation on trauma-informed mediation. I hope that you found it useful. I send you my blessings, and I hope to meet some of you in the future here in Colorado, if you're watching this in Colorado, or even around the world. I wish you a life filled with challenge, determination, resilience, and joy. Thank you.